Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kirk Cousins, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 8 tight end and quarterback rankings for the 2024 fantasy football season. Over the course of today's episode, we have a lot to cover. We're going to be talking about matchups, rest of season strength of schedule, and individual rankings for Week 8 at both the tight end and quarterback positions. So if you guys are looking for my thoughts on a specific player, be sure to travel down to the description. Like in every single description of every video, we have timestamps available. Again, while you're down there, if you have not yet already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. We're making daily fantasy content and, of course, live streaming every day, so make sure to click the bell notification button to know exactly when I am live. I will be live after tonight's game between the Minnesota Vikings and the LA Rams, so if you have any questions, be sure to swing on by. Speaking of that overall game, while you're down in the description, be sure to check out Underdog. I wanted to go ahead and first and foremost share tonight's overall play that I am making in regards to my overall entry. So I've gone ahead and put together an entry in regards to Cooper Kupp going higher on 49.5 receiving yards and Aaron Jones going higher on 59.5 rushing yards. Again, these are very easy plays that should hit. Mainly because, again, when we talk about Cooper Kupp taking on the Minnesota Vikings defense, if Cooper Kupp is at a full capacity, this defense cannot stop opposing slot receivers. Over the course of the last couple weeks, we have seen Amon-Ra go for 112 receiving yards, Jaden Reed 139, Stephon Diggs 94, Deebo Samuel 110. We have seen slot receiving options continue to dominate, mainly because they play a lot of man coverage and they blitz more than just about any team in the National Football League. So, of course, Matthew Stafford will be looking for his favorite target of all time, continuing to throw it in his direction on a consistent basis. So I think 49.5 receiving yards could even be accomplished by halftime if we're lucky. Now, when we continue with Aaron Jones, again, over the course of this season, he has been incredible when healthy. 4 of the last 5 games has surpassed this number. In fact, he has surpassed over 90 rushing yards in 4 of the last 5 games. 93, 93, 102, 32, and 94. So this number of 59.5 rushing yards should very easily be, surpassed within the overall game. Not only that, thus far this season, we have seen the Los Angeles Rams allow over 90 rushing yards to every single backfield thus far this season. Las Vegas went for 105 on the ground last week, Green Bay 97, Chicago 119, San Francisco 96, Arizona 158, and Detroit 131. Those are just the running back rushing yards against the LA Rams run stop defense, which of course thus far this season has been non-existent. This should be an easy play and an easy hit, and that's why I'm suggesting it. So again, if you guys have not yet already, be sure to sign up via Underdog using code Andrew and making that first time deposit minimum of $10. Not only gets you the first time deposit offer, potentially you can go ahead and tail tonight's pick. Not only that, you'll get my rankings sent to you from my email directly to yours every single Sunday morning. These rankings that I'm referring to are by position, by tier, half PPR, full PPR, all-encompassing rankings, including flex, so I can help you set your lineups every single Sunday morning for the remainder of the season in order to help you capture a 2024 fantasy football championship. For those of you who are interested, check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility right now based on your current location. If in fact you are not eligible based on your current location, or if you've used a code in the past, you can go ahead and find all of the rankings available via Patreon. Link is also down in the description. Thank you very much for all the support. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's begin by talking about tight end matchups going into Week 8. We've gone ahead and presented the fantasy points per game allowed in regards to each individual defense taking on tight ends. Thus far this season, of course, we see teams like the Seattle Seahawks, Ravens, Panthers, Jaguars, Colts, Bengals, Rams, and Chiefs all allowing over 10 fantasy points per game on average to opposing tight ends in a half PPR scoring format based on receiving statistics, receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. So, of course, we're going to take advantage of these overall matchups going into the week, and I will refer back to these over the course of this video, but like Brock Bowers taking on the Chiefs should be a cakewalk. If Hawkinson's available tonight against the Rams, could be a great overall matchup for him, but we'll have to wait and see whether or not he is activated. The Bengals, of course, they're taking on Dallas Goedert, but I don't even know if he's going to be active. But either way, we'll refer back to these statistics. I wanted to go ahead and also present some of the more difficult matchups. Speaking of Dallas Goedert, we have the Philadelphia Eagles who aren't allowing any statistics to opposing tight ends. Luckily, we've come and gone in regards to the overall conversation of Mike Gesicki. He is no longer a startable option. The Tennessee Titans, Miami Dolphins, Cleveland Browns, a lot of defenses that have played incredibly well against opposing tight ends. But this overall factor does not discourage me from playing a guy like Trey McBride against the Miami Dolphins. I'm still firing him up because he is the number 1 target of that Arizona Cardinals offense. Okay, now before we get into talking about the tight end rankings, I want to go ahead and present the rest of season strength of schedule so that we're all on the same page. In regards to the rest of season schedule, between 2 spectrums of time, this one being weeks 8 through 14, the Las Vegas Raiders, Philadelphia Eagles, Buffalo Bills, Browns, Giants, etc., have the easiest strength of schedule at the tight end position for the remainder of the fantasy football regular season, weeks 8 through 14. So, of course, take advantage of this. If you are looking for a tight end to potentially trade for, keep this in mind as you approach. Again, I continue to say, if you have an opportunity of getting TJ Hawkinson back on your roster, you should do so because his upcoming schedule looks incredible, and as of late, so has Sam Darnold. So, of course, we are anticipating a lot of success from that duo. Now, as we continue, of course, we have some of the more difficult matchups for the future of the remainder of the season. But again, when we talk about some of these stud tight ends, for example, like Evan Engram at the bottom of this conversation, we have Tucker Kraft, we have Jake Ferguson, There are a lot of tight ends that still, regardless of overall schedule, we're still going to have to fire up because they're going to get the opportunities, and that really is the only indicating factor. As long as the targets continue to go in their direction, we will continue to start them. Now, when we continue on to the fantasy playoffs, weeks 15 through 17, we have the Tennessee Titans, Broncos, Jets, Cardinals at the top of this overall conversation. Besides maybe McBride in the Cardinals, Njoku in the overall Cleveland Browns, everything is relatively kind of sketchy because really we're not starting Titans, Broncos, Jets, Giants, Texans, tight ends in the fantasy playoffs. We won't be able to accomplish that. That's not going to really turn into many fantasy points. But either way, just wanted to go ahead and present these statistics over the course of today's episode, just so you have this context for the future of the 2024 season. Okay, let's get into talking about my top 16 tight end rankings, beginning with our number one. Of course, we have the one and only George Kittle. With Deebo Samuel dealing with pneumonia, with Ayuk out for the season, and George Kittle being the most consistent tight end in fantasy. In the last 5 games, he's averaging 15.7 fantasy points per game in a half PPR. Has an opportunity this week of taking on the Dallas Cowboys. Under the assumption that he is healthy and at a full capacity, taking on the Dallas Cowboys should be a cakewalk. Last season, week 5 against the Dallas Cowboys, had himself a game of 4 targets, 3 receptions, 67 receiving yards, and 3 receiving touchdowns against the Cowboys. Set himself a career high of receiving touchdowns in a single game, putting up 26 fantasy points. We're going to expect the most consistent tight end in fantasy football to continue to deliver on a weekly basis in an advantageous matchup. Number 2, we have Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers coming off of another week of double-digit targets. This is 3 consecutive games of double-digit targets, 12, 10, and 14. Coming off of a game of 10 receptions for 93 receiving yards. He went ahead and broke a record last week. Amongst all tight ends in NFL history, he has the most receptions in the first 7 games of his career. An unbelievable number, and he's not slowing down. He has the best overall matchup at the tight end position, taking on the Kansas City Chiefs this week, who are nearly allowing 14 fantasy points per game on average in a half PPR to opposing tight ends. We would anticipate that Brock Bowers with Gardner Minshew is going to continue his reign of success. Moving on to Travis Kelce, our number 3. Look, Travis Kelce, the player that you have to start every week. As long as Rashee Rice is out of the lineup, and additionally, we do not have Juju Smith-Schuster within the lineup, the middle of the field will be dominated by Travis Kelce. Now, I understand that last week, obviously, he didn't find much success and much opportunity at that as well. Only 5 targets, 4 receptions, 17 receiving yards, and Noah Gray, the backup overall tight end, had himself more overall success. But going into the matchup, I would anticipate that Travis Kelce will continue to get more and more utilization within this offense. I know they brought in D-Hop. That's not really going to impact Travis Kelce. He is the middle of the field of this overall offense and is going to continue to be asked to make plays on a weekly basis in order to elevate this team to victories. We're just hoping that he gets more opportunities than 5 overall targets. Hopefully Patrick Mahomes just elevates his play going forward. Number 4, we have David Njoku. I think it's pretty short, sweet, and simple. David Njoku's coming off of an incredible week of 14 targets, 10 receptions. And even though when Jameis Winston came in the game, of his 11 passing attempts, only 2 of them were in the direction of David Njoku, they were both completions, and one of them led to a receiving touchdown, which is great. Going forward, if this offense is going to continue to focus on heavily targeting their tight end position, which again, it seems like that is the case, we're going to see a lot of production from David Njoku, especially taking on the Ravens. Most recently, we have seen tight ends dominate against this team. Cade Otton, 8 catches for 100. Zach Ertz, 4 for 68. Jake Ferguson, 6 for 95. Brock Bowers, 9 for 98. David Njoku is the next tight end in line to have themselves a huge week against the Baltimore Ravens secondary. Number 5, we have Tucker Kraft, one of the thumbnails of today's episode. Tucker Kraft takes on the Jacksonville Jaguars. Again, it is one of the easiest matchups you could possibly ask for, the 5th best at the position. We have most recently seen New England tight ends go for 12 catches, 124 against this defense, and Cole Kmet in London as well went for 5 catches, 70, and 2 touchdowns. This defense has struggled mightily in terms of stopping opposing wide receivers, of course, quarterbacks, and of course, tight ends. Therefore, Tucker Kraft, who over the course of the last 4 games is averaging 5.5 targets, 3.8 receptions, 47 receiving yards, and 1 receiving touchdown per game on average, 12.6. I would anticipate his success to continue within the upcoming performance. Number 6, we have Trey McBride. Look, Trey McBride, as of right now, leads the team in targets, receptions, and receiving yards. He is by far and away the number 1, but we just need him to score touchdowns. Outside of the fumble recovery that he had against the LA Rams where James Conner fumbled that ball, he hasn't scored a touchdown. So hopefully we're going to get ourselves more opportunities, but this is going to be a negative game script. They are already underdogs against the Miami Dolphins. Tua Tagovailoa is back. That team should be able to score offensively pretty easily. But as of late, unfortunately, the passing game of the Arizona Cardinals has struggled. Therefore, Trey McBride, a little bit of a lesser option, especially considering it is a tough matchup against the Miami Dolphins. But either way, he is still going to be the number 1 overall target of this offense. If he gets red zone utilization, the upside could be met to where he can get it to the top 3 conversation by the end of the week. Number 7, we have Kyle Pitts, who as of late has been incredible, coming off of a season-high 9 targets last week, which led to 7 receptions and 65 receiving yards. That's 65 receiving yards plus in each of the last 3 games. Now has an opportunity of taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who he most recently succeeded against, again with Kirk Cousins going for 509 passing yards, a career-high yardage, career-high passing attempts. Obviously, it takes 2 to tango, and hopefully the Buccaneers can, keep pace. But either way, it's the 9th best matchup at the tight end position. They're allowing over 10 fantasy points per game, so we would assume that the consistency and the streak of success that we have seen from Kyle Pitts to continue within the upcoming matchup. Number 8, we have Cade Otton. Look, Cade Otton is coming off an incredible game, but in the absence of Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, he may be more of a focus for the defense to stop, mainly because they know he's going to get a lot of overall targets going forward. Coming off of a game of 8 catches for 100 receiving yards and 10 total targets, obviously it had to do with the fact that they were trying to come back late in that game in a negative game script, and of course, there was no one else to throw the ball to. Therefore, if that's going to be the same case this upcoming week, no one else to throw the ball to with Evans and Godwin out, he should see himself a huge target bump, and in that overall circumstance, find himself a lot of success for fantasy purposes. Number 9, we have Jake Ferguson. Since returning from his injury, he has been averaging 7.5 targets per game. The Cowboys will most likely be in a negative game script in this overall scenario, taking on the San Francisco 49ers. Tight ends have found themselves in abundance of success recently. Tight ends from the Kansas City Chiefs last week, 8 catches for 83. Seattle Seahawks tight ends, 7 for 76. And Arizona Cardinals tight ends recently, 8 for 60 and a touchdown. Tight ends have found success against the San Francisco 49ers. Jake Ferguson is the next man up. Our number 10 to close out the B tier is Evan Engram. Look, even though Evan Engram wasn't given a lot of opportunity last week, it was mainly because they were ahead relatively early and they continued to run the ball in the second half. In fact, the Jacksonville Jaguars had a streak of 17 rushing attempts in a row in that 3rd/4th quarter. So if we're going to be in a situation in which, of course, they're going to run the ball a bunch this week, Evan Engram wouldn't be implicated to find himself much success, but they're playing against the Green Bay Packers, and the Jacksonville Jaguars defense cannot handle that offense. Therefore, we're going to be in a negative game script. A lot of passing is expected within the overall second half of this game. The Packers are allowing 9.99 fantasy points per game. They're the 10th best matchup. We've most recently seen McBride go for 8 catches, 96, and Parkinson go for 7 catches, 52. Evan Engram is implicated for a solid game here this week. Number 11, we have Mark Andrews. Again, he has had himself 3 receiving touchdowns on his last 7 receptions. And I'm not, knocking it against them. I'm just saying there is a lot of potential volatility if you are to play a player of this caliber because he doesn't find himself with many receptions and or yards. Therefore, we're hoping for another consecutive week in which he could be a top 3 tight end for fantasy purposes, finding himself in the end zone. If, in fact, the fantasy gods bless us with a potential touchdown, it would not be out of the realm of possibility because, again, the Ravens are nearly 10-point favorites against the Cleveland Browns and should be able to score a bunch early. In order to amass that lead, there's a possibility in which Mark Andrews could be implicated for a touchdown. Number 12, we have Dalton Kincaid in a very advantageous matchup taking on the Seattle Seahawks. Even though we all know that Dalton Kincaid really isn't the favorite target of this offense, it is more Khalil Shakir, Amari Cooper, maybe even Keon Coleman at times, all of them potentially getting more targets than Kincaid last week and potentially going into the future. But this week against the Seattle Seahawks, it's the 8th best matchup. We have most recently seen Kyle Pitts 7 for 65, Kittle 5 for 58 and 2 touchdowns. LaPorta even had himself a solid week, 4 for 53. If everyone's going to find success, even LaPorta, why not Kincaid this week within the overall matchup, which should be an advantageous one? Number 13, we have Cole Kmet coming off the bye week. Look, Cole Kmet is very similar to like a Mark Andrews in which he requires red zone utilization because he doesn't get himself a very high target count. The last 3 games have consisted of 3, 4, 5 receptions each game. So if you're going to be in that overall range and a touchdown isn't going to accompany it, you're going to have to get yourself a lot of yardage within the upcoming matchup. The Washington Commanders aren't the easiest overall matchup within the overall conversation. Considering the potential of Jaden Daniels not playing due to the injury, I think it just helps the offense for the Bears get the ball more often and have more potential drives for success in this overall situation. Number 14, Hunter Henry, man. He has established himself as the number 1 receiving target of Drake May going forward. The elevation of the offense is significant. The overall passing attempts, the overall usage of Hunter Henry has been significant. And as we continue on, we're going to hope that this continues to be an existing form of this offense. Because the last time we saw Hunter Henry take on the Jets, he was coming off of a huge week in week 2. And then in week 3 against the Jets, went for 1.9 fantasy points, his lowest overall total of the season. We're hoping he's not going to disappear because tight ends as of late have found success against the New York Jets. Pittsburgh's tight ends last week, 6 catches for 87. Buffalo tight ends, 7 for 63 and a touchdown. Hunter Henry, hopefully a solid week here. Number 15, we have Zach Ertz. Even with Marcus Mariota at quarterback, they both connected for a lot of overall statistics. Therefore, even without the potential of Jaden Daniels in the lineup, I would anticipate that Zach Ertz is a solid play, especially while we have guys like, McLaurin on the outside being double covered the entire game and potentially shut down for the contest. We move on to Sam LaPorta, our number 16. I'm going to play the patience game. With Jameson Williams suspended for the next 2 weeks, again, there is less potential for guys like Khalif Raymond to be a weekly potential touchdown option. Therefore, in a game in which we do anticipate the Detroit Lions to potentially score 30 to 40 points, if they're going to do so, hopefully Sam LaPorta would be implicated to at least score something within the given week. I wanted to go ahead and throw out a special number 17 with Jonnu Smith. If we're going to see the Los Angeles Chargers tight ends having themselves 10 receptions for 119 receiving yards against the Arizona Cardinals, I would assume that, McDaniel is going to find himself in a situation where perhaps he's going to utilize a little bit more Jonnu Smith within the given week, considering he's coming off a performance of 7 catches for 96 and a touchdown. So just keep that in mind. All right, let's move on to the quarterback conversation. In regards to week 8 matchups, of course, the Jacksonville Jaguars are by far and away, not even close, the easiest matchup. Then we talk about, besides the fact that they have allowed 16 passing touchdowns, the Houston Texans allowed 15 passing touchdowns thus far this season, which is the second highest in that overall category. And funny enough, when we look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they've allowed 11 passing touchdowns. 5 of those came just last week against Lamar Jackson. So, of course, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers really most recently kind of jumping into this conversation. In fact, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have allowed 4 passing touchdowns to Kirk Cousins and 5 to Lamar Jackson. The other 2 were to the rest of the quarterbacks. So that just kind of gives you an understanding. As of late, they haven't been playing great defense against solid quarterbacks, and Kirk Cousins has an opportunity of taking them on once again this week. But either way, just wanted to show some of the more advantageous matchups while also presenting some of the more disadvantageous matchups. Taking on the Miami Dolphins, the Chicago Bears, the Denver Broncos, San Francisco 49ers, these are not fun experiences for opposing quarterbacks. Therefore, be very careful with the Kyler Murray taking on the Dolphins, Marcus Mariota, Jaden Daniels taking on the Chicago Bears, Bryce Young, of course, we're not starting, taking on the Denver Broncos. I'm sure we're all aware of that. Dak Prescott taking on the San Francisco 49ers. These have been definitely difficult matchups over the course of the last couple seasons, but as of late, definitely some that we want to avoid. Okay, with this all covered, let's go ahead and transition into talking about the rest of season strength of schedule at the quarterback position based on fantasy points per game allowed. We find that the Eagles, Steelers, Titans, Broncos, Giants, Detroit Lions, etc. have the easiest matchups for the remainder of the fantasy football regular season weeks 8 through 14. So keep that in mind if you are looking for a quarterback who has himself an advantageous schedule. Those would be it. But look at the separation. In terms of fantasy points per game allowed, between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs, we're only talking about 2.6 fantasy points that separate the difference. Even though that is a lot of potential points on a per week average to accumulate, overall, it's not that big of a difference. So don't take these at heart and be like, this is the only way to approach. I have to go ahead and get Russell Wilson on roster. This doesn't implicate that. But going forward, again, understand that there are some more advantageous matchups that will help your lesser quarterbacks elevate to an extra potential. Now, some of the more difficult overall rest of season strength of schedules in regards to week 8 through 14, would be the Patriots, the Cardinals, Commanders, Bills. But again, like I've said before, we're still starting our studs. Josh Allen, Jaden Daniels, Kyler Murray, we're still going to play them because they're going to continue to deliver on a weekly basis. And all 3 of them, besides the fact that they will potentially struggle within the passing game, all have rushing upside, and that is the difference. The fantasy point per game averages that I throw up on screen are purely off of passing statistics isolated, because rushing statistics cannot be determined by a defense against a quarterback. Therefore, we continue on with the fantasy playoff conversation. The Titans at the top of this conversation, mainly because, again, when you play against the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Houston Texans, and of course the Indianapolis Colts, those are really easy matchups to say the least over the course of the season. But when you have 2 of those matchups within the fantasy playoffs, of course, success should be implied. We're not starting Will Levis. Keep it moving. Daniel Jones, Aaron Rodgers, Gardner Minshew, Dak Prescott, Bryce Young, maybe, Andy Dalton. These are not great matchups in the fantasy playoffs, but at least Lamar has himself pretty easy weeks here. Either way, keep this in mind. We're going to go ahead and transition into the more difficult matchups in this overall conversation. Of course, the Detroit Lions and Jared Goff have Buffalo, Chicago, San Francisco. 3 teams that are playoff contenders this year and could very easily make some shootouts in the overall circumstance. They may be difficult matchups as of right now, but a shootout could be implicated, which even elevates Jared Goff's overall potential. Okay, let's go ahead and transition into talking about my top 16 quarterback rankings for week 8, beginning with Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson is the best we have seen him in a very long time. When I compare his current numbers over the course of the first 7 games of the season in comparison to his 2019 MVP campaign, where he had 36 passing touchdowns that year, he is on pace to reach that overall number, to potentially even surpass that this season in terms of passing touchdowns. On top of the fact that he's coming off of another week in which he surpassed over 40 rushing yards, he continues to do that every single week. I mean, last week, quite literally had 5 passing touchdowns and only 5 incompletions. When you are playing at this level, it doesn't matter who you're taking on. I don't care how many points they're favored by. Lamar Jackson's an automatic start every game rest of the season. The MVP form is even getting better every week, which is ridiculous. Number 2, we have Josh Allen. again, last week, with no rushing upside, still was managing to put up 21 fantasy points, had 3 rushing attempts for 1 rushing yard. As long as we're going to continue to be in situations in which, of course, you're taking on the Seattle Seahawks, they should be implicated to potentially have a shootout here. Josh Allen will have himself more rushing upside, which will only elevate his baseline of production. We've seen a lot of quarterbacks find success against the Seattle Seahawks. Kirk Cousins really didn't find much. But again, outside of him, Jared Goff went for 292 and 2 touchdowns. Daniel Jones, 257, 2 touchdowns. Purdy, 255 and 3 touchdowns. Josh Allen should be able to continue that streak of success for quarterbacks against the Seattle Seahawks defense. Number 3 to begin the A tier, we have Jordan Love. An 11-game streak of 2 or more passing touchdowns. 6 of those last 11 games, 3 or more touchdowns. As long as Jordan Love continues to score touchdowns and now has the easiest matchup at the position, I would anticipate that, of course, Jordan Love should dominate against this defense. Again, a defense that is allowing 2.3 passing touchdowns per game on average to opposing quarterbacks. If, in fact, Jordan Love threw for 3, maybe 4 passing touchdowns this week, it would not shock me at the slightest. Moving on to our number 4, we have Jalen Hurts. Look, Jalen Hurts, 14 passing attempts last week. It was a positive game script. The offense ran the ball a bunch considering they were up big, considering there was no offensive kind of rebuttal from the New York Giants offense. Therefore, he was able to save his week with 2 rushing touchdowns. That's the Jalen Hurts way. We'll take that. But going into this week's matchup, it is implicated to be a shootout against the Bengals. They are the 9th best matchup at the quarterback position. We would anticipate with all those passing yards and the potential rushing upside that Jalen Hurts presents, should have himself an exciting game. But again, it takes 2 to tango. Therefore, we have Joe Burrow. In order for this to be a high-scoring matchup in a quote-unquote shootout, you need Joe Burrow to step up to the task on hand and deliver a solid overall performance. He's coming off of a week in which, of course, he struggled at times early in that game, but was able to figure it out in the second half, taking on a division rival like the Cleveland Browns. But like we mentioned last week, Joe Burrow has struggled in his career against the Cleveland Browns. And being able to find himself victorious in that overall matchup, in my opinion, is a huge confidence booster because he hasn't beaten them very many times in his career. Therefore, going into the week's matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles, again, this is a team that in their secondary has struggled at times over the course of the season. What better way to take advantage of that than with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins going into the given week? I'm anticipating a lot of air raid from the Cincinnati Bengals offense against the secondary. Moving on to our number 6, Jared Goff. Jared Goff has been incredible. Now, if you want me to quantify how incredible he has been, let's just put this into perspective. In the last 4 games, he has set an NFL record for the highest passing completion percentage in a 4-game streak. 83.5% passing completion percentage. Over the course of the last 4 games, he has 15 passing incompletions and 9 passing touchdowns. He nearly has more passing touchdowns than incompletions in the last 4 games. Jared Goff has been on fire. We anticipate them to blow out the Tennessee Titans, and of course, for him to have himself a huge fantasy week in doing so. Number 7, we have CJ Stroud. Now, even though he is coming off of the worst game of his NFL career, again, a bounce back is expected, especially when you get a get-right performance against his division rival, the Indianapolis Colts, in which he has dominated against every single time out throughout his entire career. In the last 3 games against Gus Bradley's defense, back in week 1 of this season, 234 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns. In 2023, 264, 2 passing touchdowns, 384 and 2 passing touchdowns, 0 interceptions against this defense. The Colts are the 7th best matchup. CJ Stroud, a bounce back week, is in line within the overall performance. Number 8, we have Kirk Cousins taking on a team that most recently has given up not only 5 passing touchdowns to Lamar Jackson last week, but again, even Spencer Rattler moved the ball on them. And if that isn't enough, just remember that back in week 5, Tampa Bay allowed 309 passing yards and 4 passing touchdowns to Kirk Cousins in an overtime victory. But again, in order for Kirk Cousins to be able to duplicate these numbers or potentially accumulate high totals within these overall categories, we're going to need the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to score offensively. The reason why that Kirk Cousins was able to move the ball as much is because he was forced to have to keep up with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense, which took an early lead in that overall game. It takes 2 to tango, and in this overall scenario, yes, the Buccaneers are the 4th best matchup, but if they're not able to move the ball offensively and score, it will not force Kirk Cousins to, very much so throw the ball, and it will be a running threat for the second half, which hopefully is not going to be the case, as we should see Kirk Cousins light it up through the air against the secondary that cannot stop this Atlanta Falcons passing attack. Number 9, we have Sam Darnold. Hopefully, we're going to get back to Sam Darnold throwing 2 touchdowns, but really, going into the given week, they're taking on the Rams. The Rams are throwing everything against the wall this week, mainly because, again, if the Rams lose, I think they're pretty much going to pack it in. I'm hoping that is not the case because, again, last season, the Rams at 3-6 were able to turn it around and still make the playoffs, but we'll have to wait and see. It feels like everything is coming to this pinnacle of where if, in fact, they cannot beat the Minnesota Vikings, they'll pack it in. But either way, Sam Darnold has an opportunity of taking on this defense. He took them on last year, week 18, was relatively successful as a quarterback of the San Francisco 49ers with a backup offense. This time, of course, he has all these weapons at his disposal. If TJ Hawkinson is available tonight, it makes him an even better play within the overall week. Coming off of a performance of 82% passing completion percentage against the Detroit Lions, I'm expecting that continued success within the upcoming matchup. Number 10, we have Brock Purdy. Look, Brock Purdy's coming off of a very rough week, but luckily his scrambling was able to get himself into a solid position with 2 rushing touchdowns on 27 rushing yards. Not having Debo, Ayuk, Jennings last week definitely did impact Brock Purdy, but with the potential of having another week of practice with guys like Ricky Pearsall, hopefully Kittle healthy, and hopefully Juwan Jennings returning, it will elevate his overall potential for success against the Dallas Cowboys. Last season against this defense, 252 passing yards, 4 passing touchdowns, a 71% passing completion percentage. Should be a cakewalk for this offense. Moving on to our number 11, Caleb Williams, coming off of the bye week. In the last 3 games, Caleb Williams has maintained a 74% passing completion percentage, a 7 passing touchdown to 1 interception rate. Not only that, has accumulated 102 rushing yards in the last 3 games total. Therefore, taking on a matchup like the Washington Commanders, allowing the 8th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, should be a potential matchup in which Caleb Williams is able to sustain this overall streak of success coming off of the bye week and the preparation against this defense with no Jaden Daniels potentially on the opposite side. It could lead to even more opportunities for this Bears offense and for Caleb Williams to find fantasy success. Number 12, we have Tua Tagovailoa coming off of the concussion protocol, taking on the Cardinals. Again, the Cardinals in the last 2 weeks have given up 349 passing yards to Justin Herbert and 258 passing yards and 4 passing touchdowns to Jordan Love. This secondary is not playing well thus far this season. They've allowed the 6th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks in terms of passing statistics isolated. Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Achane have been bottled up as of late. It's time to let lightning out of the bottle and allow these receiving threats to tear apart this defense. That is my assumption going into the given week. Tua should have himself a solid overall performance based on, of course, a lot of these receivers making plays after the catch. Moving on to our number 13, Kyler Murray. Listen, Kyler Murray is purely based on whether or not he has himself rushing success. In games in which Kyler has found himself rushing success, 40 or more rushing yards, he's averaging 20.36 fantasy points per game in the 5 games in which he's accomplished that. In the 2 games in which they were blown out by Washington and Green Bay, he's only got himself, 0 to 10 rushing yards in those overall games. And not only that, has averaged 11 fantasy points per game within those overall contests. If the Miami Dolphins kind of boat race them out of the overall conversation, they will be in trouble because honestly, his passing overall production has not been relevant as of late, and they will not be able to catch up in that overall circumstance. Moving on to our number 14, we have Bo Nix. Look, the fact of the matter is, Bo Nix is averaging 6.21 fantasy points per game just off of rushing statistics isolated on a per game average. So when you take on Bryce Young and the Carolina Panthers, we're anticipating a game in which should be a cakewalk for the Denver Broncos offense on the ground through the air. It does not matter. The Panthers are the 3rd best matchup for quarterbacks, so Bo Nix implicated for a solid week to say the very least. Number 15, Russell Wilson taking on the New York Giants. If the Giants offense cannot figure it out and their offensive line aren't going to protect Daniel Jones, anticipate a game in which, of course, Russell Wilson and the Steelers are able to light it up just in the same way in which we saw last week the Philadelphia Eagles able to accomplish that. Last season, Russell Wilson, from weeks 1 through 16, was averaging 205 passing yards, 1.73 passing touchdowns, and 17.13 fantasy points per game in a 4-point per passing touchdown league. We would assume that, of course, if Russell Wilson could also get a couple sprinkles of rushing statistics like he did last season, averaging 23 rushing yards per game, he could be an even better quarterback within the given week. The final quarterback I wanted to mention is Aaron Rodgers, taking on the New England Patriots. Last time out against this defense, 27 of 35 passing, a 77% passing completion percentage, 281 yards, 2 passing touchdowns. Did not even have a better offensive coordinator in Todd Downing and did not have Devontae Adams. You add those to the overall mix with more implementation of Breece Hall out of the backfield. This leads to Aaron Rodgers having himself a fantastic fantasy performance in the middle of the overall pack. In comparison to Lamar, obviously not a great overall play, but in the middle of the pack, if you're in a desperate situation, a solid play within the given week. All right, that's going to cover it in regards to my top 16 tight end and quarterback rankings for week 8 of the 2024 fantasy football season. Thank you everybody for watching. Again, like I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, I will be back live streaming here on the channel after the Vikings and Rams game. So be sure to swing on by if you have any questions. Outside of that, thank you everybody for watching. And until tomorrow, which we'll be talking about my hidden gems for week 8. Thank you everybody, and I'll see you guys. Peace.